Hello? That's excellent. There we go. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Thank you all for taking your seats so promptly. It's great to see you here at the Museum of Scotland. If you get a chance, amongst all of the fascinating talks we've got today and the great conversation we're going to have, the museum itself is amazing. So it's worth having a look around. Let's see if I can get this right. My name's Dickon Howell, and I am Programme Director for Insight. I say that, the people that do all the work really are sat in the front row here, Henk and Georgina and Mario, who you may all have met on reception. So, welcome to SIME 2024. In preparing for today, I was having to think back to when I first got involved with Insight, and it was 10 years ago, in 2014, when I was still at the MMO, and I got asked by Ian Boyd, who was then Chief Scientist at DEFRA, and Richard Hurd to support them in the development of a new industry-funded science programme called Insights, which is short for the Influence of Man-Made Structures in the Ecosystem. At the time, the way this programme was set up and run was pretty new for the UK. We got funding from industry, but with the same scrutiny and governance that you get in UKRI-funded science. And since then, we've had another phase of Insight, and we've delivered nearly £10 million worth of research. And along the way, we've created a new model for how NERC can commission and deliver marine science for impact. That's informed programmes such as the Sustainable Management of UK Marine Resources, or SMMR, which some of you may be aware of, EcoWind, which is looking at the ecological effects of offshore wind, and the new programme called EcoFlow, which is in the commissioning process at the moment, which is looking at floating offshore wind. And more importantly, and what we'll hear about today, is we've become a focal point for European and UK research into marine structures. I don't think it's too far to say, is we've changed the way that we understand the role of these structures in the ecosystem of the North Sea, and provided a foundation for much of our current work across decommissioning, offshore wind, fisheries, and environmental restoration. This is the last SIME for Insight Phase 2 today. Not that it's going to be the last SIME ever, but it's the last SIME, I think, on Insight Phase 2. So today we're going to focus exclusively on work coming from the Insight programme. We'll be hearing about topics as broad-ranging as foraging by marine predators, testing the limits of the UK autonomous fleet, understanding fish aggregation, blue carbon benefits, developing AI to speed up the understanding of the biodiversity on marine structures. And tomorrow, we're going to be a bit more applied, and we're really lucky to have colleagues from government and industry around to have those important discussions on how we can create lasting impact from our science. Before we kick off, just a bit of housekeeping. There are no fire alarms today. If there is an alarm, please go out to the exit on Lothian Street that you came in, so just out there. And toilets are near that Lothian Street entrance as well. For those of you that haven't found them, coffee and refreshments are in the room upstairs. Please take time amongst your conversations to look at the posters and ask any questions you may have. Hopefully, those responsible for them will be hanging around. Without further ado, I'm going to move on to our first speaker. And we're really fortunate today to have Professor Colin Moffat with us. I'm going to give a short biography of Colin, which he's not going to like, but I'm going to do it anyway. Colin's a visiting professor at Robert Gordon University and an honorary professor at Heriot-Watt University, and many of you will know him as he was previously Head of Science at Marine Scotland and responsible both for the Marine Laboratory in Aberdeen and the Freshwater Laboratory in Pitlochry. He retired from the post of Chief Scientific Advisor Marine to the Scottish Government in 2021. Colin also led on the production of the OSPAR Quality Status Report 2010 and the Intermediate Assessment 2017, and has undertaken other assessments of the North East Atlantic and Scotland's Marine Assessment 2020. He was instrumental in laying some of the foundations for the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, and is a member of the pool of experts for the UN World Ocean Assessments and a coordinating author of the World Ocean Assessment 3, due for publication in 2025. Colin continues to study contamination of aquatic systems by microplastics and pharmaceuticals, as well as the impacts of ocean acidification and climate change. He's currently a trustee of the Scottish Association of Marine Science, and I work with him very closely, as chair of the Programme Advisory Group for EcoWind, which is a successive research programme of insight that's investigating the ecological effects of offshore wind. So without further ado, I'd like you to welcome Colin to the stage.
Thanks. I've got a wire. Oh. Good morning, everybody. And can I first of all thank the organisers for inviting me to come here this morning and to launch your conference. I'm absolutely fascinated by the subject that you've been studying. But what I want to do is I want to take you on a wee journey about some time ago and maybe something about today. So I want to tell you a story, and all good stories start with once upon a time. And once upon a time, in an area of the North Sea that we were eventually going to call OSPAR Region 2, the Greater North Sea, an area that has a surface of 750,000 square kilometers and a volume of 94,000 cubic kilometers, so that's a lot of water. An area of water that's in a temperate latitude, strongly influenced by the waters that come in from the Atlantic, and characterized by actually a seabed that's mainly mud, sand and gravel. In other words, it doesn't have much going through the water column in terms of solid structures. An area of water that is home to some 10 million birds on an annual basis, that produces some yummy food to eat. Nephrops, really scrumptious. But also home to the likes of the ocean quahaug, and this little beastie here, which could have been born when Shakespeare was writing A Midsummer Night's Dream, would have been sitting on the seabed back then, not with any clue what was about to happen to it. And it's also an area, I'm looking through the audience, and I'm not really sure how many of you would know. Have any of you guessed the year yet? No, okay. But probably not many of you were around then. I was, but I was in nappies, okay? I don't know if any of you were more than in nappies, but anyway. It was the year that Crying in the Chapel by Elvis Presley was in the Hot 100. Radio 1 hadn't even been launched, so we hadn't had to listen to Tony Blackburn. The internal combustion engine ruled the road, despite the fact that in 1884, the first commercial production electric vehicle was made. But we made a choice to go for internal combustion engines. And also, diesel traction had not yet replaced steam traction in the railways up to Aberdeen. And actually, even in 2024, we still don't have electrification to Aberdeen. But also, when the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration at Mauna Loa was 320.79 parts per million. And is that a lot, you say? Well, in the previous 800,000 years, the maximum had been about 285 parts per million. So, more or less, since pre-industrial 1850 to 1900, we'd gone from about 285 to 320. So that's setting the scene about once upon a time. But once upon a time, there was a discovery. And this discovery came about in 1965. Hope you all got that year. 1965, when gas was discovered off the coast of East Anglia. But it wasn't until 1975 that the first oil was brought ashore from initially the Argyll field and then ultimately the Forties field. And in that time, between 1965 and 1975, 10 years, the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration at Mauna Loa had gone up to 329.38 parts per million. So it's going up a wee bitty. But Aberdeen became known as the oil capital of Europe. Great, thank you. And it was an oil and gas city. It transformed from a fisheries town to an oil and gas city. And over the next few years, indeed, up until 2015, when this industry reached its peak, when there was 173 active rigs drilling in the region, making this the world's most active offshore drilling region. And then in 2019, by the time we reached the pre-pandemic stage, there were only 112 active platforms. But what had happened over the period of time was that this massive infrastructure had developed of pipelines, of rigs, but also of coastal structures. And there were ships going back and forth at high frequency, and there were helicopters going back and forth at high frequency. And so ultimately, we had developed this massive industry. And at the same time, we put all these hard structures into what previously had been a water column and mud. By the time we got to the end of 2022, we've produced 46.9 billion barrels of oil equivalent. And what you see there is whether it's oil or whether it's gas, we have continued to produce it. And there's still quite a lot of reserves left. And also at the same time, we've got gas left. And in 2023, we produced 33.45 million tons of oil and 30 billion cubic meters of gas, worth something in the region of an awful lot of money. So that's where we're going. And so our story takes us to a time when we've produced a lot of oil. Now, if we jump back in time a wee bitty again, then we come to something called OSPAR Decision 98.3. And you're all going to be familiar with that. What's OSPAR Decision 98.3? Well, it's up there on the board, just in case you forgot. It's a decision on the disposal of disused offshore installations. And what it's basically saying is the dumping and leaving wholly or partly in place of disused offshore installations within the maritime area is prohibited. It's not going to happen. Brent Spar. Oh, did I mention that? What happened to Brent Spar? It was dumped, wasn't it, in deep water. But also it said, by way of derogation. In other words, there's ways around it. You don't have to if you can get derogation. So that was 98.3. Now, let's put this into context. 1998, OSPAR decides in July to ban the dumping of offshore structures. The OSPAR Convention came into force in, March 1998. So it was almost one of the first decisions that OSPAR made. Also, in terms of hazardous substances, there was a thing called background reference concentrations and ecotoxicological assessment criteria. They didn't last very long. What we use today came into force in 2008. Background assessment concentrations and environmental assessment criteria. And the other thing is, this decision was made before OSPAR had a biodiversity strategy. So actually, the decision was made where we didn't really understand too much about the biodiversity of the North Sea. But it's there. So what does this actually mean? Well, the challenge is that when this decision was made back in 1998, here in 2024, a lot has changed. There has been a massive change in something very specific. This, the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. And I've marked out 2 points prior to 2024. April 1998, so when the Sintra Agreement was made. April 2014, roundabout when InSight started. And today. And what do you see has happened? We've gone from 366.17 parts per million to, when this program started, 398.63 parts per million to 423.91 parts per million. And indeed, one of the daily averages recently on the 29th of April was 428.59 parts per million. Now, if you look at the difference between 1998 and 2024, in other words, when the agreement was made and today, we've got a change of 57.74 parts per million. So that's in about 26 years. Last time, that change took from 1800 to 1979. So that's a lot of years. So what that tells us is that since this agreement, the amount of change in carbon dioxide historically took 179 years. And we've managed to do it in 26. A big, massive change. And when you think about the fact that 100 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, change of this amount, was the difference between it being a warm period and an ice age, and that maximum was 285, and now we're at 423, you begin to realize the severity of the differences that we are experiencing. And these differences come at a cost. The cost, of course, increasing temperature, deoxygenation, acidification. And these are just, if you like, the physical and chemical aspects. The biological aspects we are now beginning just to understand. To give you an example here, this is the daily sea surface temperature around the world, 60 south, 60 north. And what you see here is there's 2023 and there is 2024. Now, this is obviously from 1982 to 2011 average. There's an awful lot there, so let's simplify this a wee bit here. Let's get rid of half of it. And let's look at 1998, 2014 again, and 2024. Now, what you see is there's a lot of natural variation, because there's 99, 97, 98, but they're basically at the lower ends. Then we've got the 2014, 2013, 2015, and then 22, 23, 24. So what you see is natural variation excluded, we are basically getting warmer and warmer and warmer. Now, this is global. Let's look specifically at the North Sea. And this is the last 40 years ranking of sea surface temperature in the North Sea. And the darker the red it is, the higher it is. So look at our area here. Very, very dark red, the warmest in the last 40 years. And round about here, second warmest and third warmest in the last 40 years. So everything is showing that we've got a significant increase in temperature. It's not uniform around our northeast Atlantic, but look down here, Iberian Peninsula, Africa, we have got serious warming problems. And of course, where does our water come from? It comes south and goes north. There's another thing that's happened in the last 20 years, or since OSPAR came along. And that is that we've developed biological indicators. And this is taken from Quality Status Report 2023. And these are indicators of state, specifically for the Greater North Sea, of pH is pelagic habitats, BH, benthic habitats, FC, fish, B, birds, M, mammals, FW, food webs, and so an NI is non-invasive species. And what you see there is a summary. So we've got to the stage now of having multiple indicators of pelagic habitats, clearly of interest to us, benthic habitats, fish and fish populations, food web structures. We now have these. We didn't have these back in 1998. And the conclusion from this is that basically there's widespread degradation of the ecosystems. And actually, this is caused by human activities. Now, we're not saying what's causing it. We're not saying whether this is to do with hard structures in the North Sea. What we are saying, though, is that we can detect change. We can detect problems. We can detect 5 minutes to go. And it's okay. I don't have many slides left. So that's the problem. We can now detect change. What we aren't seeing is why that change has specifically occurred. Oh, I've got 10 minutes, folks, so give me an extension for good behavior. Now, the other things that we've got is something about changes in plankton life forms. So we've got an indicator, again, of these changes in plankton life forms and what this actually means for our environment. And if we look at the holoplankton, then the results suggest, my gosh, we've got a bit of a change. When you look at the reasons for the change, there, that big splurge is because of temperature. So actually, we are now able to say that temperature, and in some cases acidification, is driving some of the changes in the plankton population. So actually, we are getting to the stage of beginning to say cause and effect. What this is ultimately saying, if you look at long-term trends, is that most planktonic life forms are declining in abundance throughout the Northeast Atlantic. Now, so far I haven't touched on, well, what's the consequence of having structures there as well. But what we need to think about is, if this is what is happening, and they think they know why it's happening, what does this mean for the science that you're doing? What does this mean for the interpretation of the science that you are doing? Now, of course, on comes offshore wind. Because the other thing was, back in 1998, how many people had thought about wind power? Well, actually, 15 miles away, or well, a bit more, 18 miles away from where I was born, there was a guy, James Blythe, in Marykirk, northeast of Scotland, who we think developed electricity from a wind turbine, the first person to do it. Which is quite useful, actually, because it was James Watt that's caused the problem we've got. And so, potentially, James Blythe has maybe solved it for us. But we made a choice. We made a choice to ignore James Blythe's work. And to, in fact, it was said by the locals to be the work of the devil, because he offered to actually power the whole of the community, streetlights, in Marykirk, northeast Scotland, in 1884. But we didn't go for it. Now, the other thing is that, what is this? This is the amount of, if you like, seabed, the spatial requirements for installations between now, 1990 and 2050. And this big blue bit is because of offshore wind. What we're saying is that offshore wind is going to actually require masses, oodles of space. Far, far more than the offshore oil and gas industry required. And it's a global problem. And if you look at what we're seeing in terms of the development around the UK, this is significant. And although for offshore oil and gas, when we plot the oil fields, we get similar sort of spaces, the actual structures have a very small footprint. 5 minutes, it's 5 minutes this time. I don't get another extension. No, okay, right. But what you see is at the moment we've got 3,352 offshore turbines. The other thing is, when are we going to replace offshore wind? Are we ever going to replace offshore wind? Because we're getting to a stage where we're saying offshore oil and gas, we're shifting out from that. We're stopping it. Is this permanent? Is this going to be our electricity source for the next 100, 200, 300 years? Rather than we've popped an industry in, we've taken all the stuff out, we're going to get rid of it. And what does that mean? If we get rid of all the oil and gas structures, we're just replacing them with something else. Whereas back in 1998, the concept was we take it away and it goes back to what it was originally. Well, that's never going to happen now, is it? Because we are putting in structures, and some of them might be floating and some of them might be fixed. So there's a big change today to where we were when decisions were made. I am just about finished, by the way. Now, already, the offshore oil and gas, sorry, that's not offshore oil and gas, is it? The wind industry is thinking about, well, what can we actually do in terms of new development? We can build new ones, we can repower, or in fact, we can extend the life. Now, one of the important things that we should be doing is we should be saying that offshore wind is alternative energy. It is not clean energy. Please do nobody say offshore wind is clean. It's not. It is alternative. It has consequences. Because the flip side of the coin is, what you're saying is oil and gas is dirty. Well, actually, how dirty is carbon dioxide? How dirty is methane? The problem is not methane or carbon dioxide, it's us causing it to be emitted. So, now the conundrum. The conundrum is a program called InSight and the InSight consensus. What you've all decided, thumbs up, is, and this is a quote by Professor Dickon Howell. Our peer-reviewed science has revealed that these structures have positive as well as negative impacts on the marine environment, and their associated biodiversity is greater than anyone ever imagined. And you can see some of the other things that have come out. The choice of decommissioning options requires policymakers and managers to prioritize some targets over others, or when considering a holistic approach, to accept that some targets will likely not be met. 2 minutes, thank you. This, some targets will likely not be met. Okay, how many targets have we actually met so far? Seriously, how many targets have we met? Why have we not been meeting targets? Is the science clear? I think it is. I think it's very clear. I think you've done quite an amazing job. So why are we not meeting targets? Why are we still having to debate strongly that we have an issue? Now, you'll recognize what I've got there, I hope. 1 minute, thank you. You know, what are these? These are the InSight main primary challenges, okay? So that's what you're here to do. A recent paper by Fortune, Majet et al., which they called Haven or Hell. Yes, Alethea's in the audience, by the way. Basically said there are problems. Not only are there problems, but we've got problems with data. We've got problems with criteria. We've got problems with protocols. I used to chair the Marine Science Coordination Committee for the United Kingdom, and what did we say? Oh, we've got problems with data. Oh, we've got problems with protocols. Oh, we've got problems with people doing things different ways. And in 2024, we're still there. Basically, we've got to think about improving the framing of policy. This is where we've got to go. We've got to think about net gain. Where's David Patterson? David, this summer, I believe. Yeah, David's going to sort net gain this summer. We've got relevant indicators of state. We know now. We've got them. We've got international agreements. But we are not being clear about what our government is thinking. What was the Scottish government thinking recently when it sort of said, let's forget about our targets? Well, they were never going to meet them anyway. So, here we go. What does success look like? We've got options here for what we might do. This is the Greater North Sea, the thing you saw earlier. Is that the solution? That when, and I'll flick back so you can see what happens, that we go green, basically. Is that what we're aiming for? And if we do that, does that mean that it assists us in determining management options and drives prioritization? We have the indicators, we know they're not green, Are we having to put them green in order to get our politicians to do what they say? And of course, we've just looked at one thing. Look at everything else we get from the ocean. Do we want to keep that, or do we not want to keep that? So, this is my last slide. Ladies and gentlemen, what's the end of the story going to look like? It's up to you. You are going to decide. Now, yes, you're going to be nimble. You're going to respond to the changes that you're noting. But ultimately, you're the people with the knowledge, with the evidence, with the expertise. You need to get out there and get the people who are making the decisions to make the decisions. You're going to have to influence the people who go to OSPAR, or go to OSPAR yourself. You're going to have to go to ICES committees. You're going to have to go out there and speak to people and tell them using your evidence. Because my grandson is 2.5. He probably, hopefully, will be alive in 80 years' time. I don't want him to be looking out at a North Sea that is uninhabitable, that is full of non-invasive species, that doesn't give us fish. I want him to look out at a North Sea that has been looked after and that has been maintained because of you. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you, Colin, for a very rousing speech and for drawing together so many different threads across the last 20, 30 years. I think that was really, really interesting for us all, and certainly makes you think. So thank you for kicking us off there. I'm Henk van Rijn from Hull Marine Consulting. I also work on the Insight Programme Director team with Dickon, Georgina, and Mario. I'm going to walk us through session 1 today, where we've got some great presentations lined up. Building on the objectives that Colin introduced, in and around that, it's been a very interesting couple of decades in terms of marine technology and innovation. So this session, we thought we'd kick off with a lot of the techie stuff. And you're going to hear from Dan Jones from the National Oceanography Centre, who has been working on the At-Sea project. Dan's going to be talking about autonomous exploration of the environment at the Northwest Hutton decommissioning site and an awful lot of AUV work there. We're going to hear from John Halpin and Joseph Marlowe, both from Scottish Association of Marine Science, both working on the North Sea 3D project. And John's going to be talking to us about the analysis of imagery data, some of the lessons they've learned through that process, and I understand there's quite a bit of AI that's now involved in that project. And Joe is going to be talking about creating 3D visual reality environments to promote understanding of structures in the marine environment, and a plug for some of the VR work and demonstration outside the room. So please give that a go. I think Joe will be talking about that. And finally, bringing us in at the very end of the session will be Josh Lawrence from Heriot-Watt. Josh is working on the fish spams project, and he'll be talking about the sampling challenges around marine artificial structures and how those challenges can generate innovation with low risk, low cost, low carbon marine autonomous systems. So without further ado, we're going to move over to Dan, who's giving us an online presentation from Southampton. So I'll cue Dan. There's Dan there. Welcome, Dan.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Hank. It's great to be able to speak to you all today, and apologies for being online only. It would have been good to see you all in person. But I'm going to be presenting on our approach of using autonomous vehicles to characterize bits of the environment, and using Northwest Hutton as a good example of where we're going to go and the sort of things that we can find out. So as Hank says, this is part of the At-Sea project, one of the Insight projects, and it's a work of quite a large team across NOC and the University of Southampton, including an extensive use of the UK Marine Autonomous and Robotic Systems fleet team as well. So after Colin's excellent talk, I barely need to give an introduction to the North Sea. but there's a few things to point out that are really relevant from my point of view. One is there's a lot of structures. There's also a very complex environment. There's lots of things going on. There's heavy fishing activity. There's busy shipping lanes. There's actually high currents and a lot of environmental factors as well. All of these make challenges in trying to use autonomous systems in this sort of environment. We've also got some other challenges as well. We've got trying to understand what the role of structures are. It's complicated. There's positive and negative effects. We need, as Colin said, decisions to be made that are really quite important, requiring robust scientific evidence. And we need a lot of new data gathered through regular environmental survey and monitoring to understand how these changes relate to the changes in the natural environment that are being caused by temperature change, by acidification, all those other things. To do that, we need to be regularly visiting sites in the North Sea and elsewhere. And we have been using the latest generation of autonomous systems to try and address the question of whether these autonomous systems can address some of these challenges and whether the use of systems that are deployed from shore to go to these relatively remote sites can improve the way that we do marine environmental monitoring. So, for example, we think there might be reduced cost. We could potentially, that could translate to increasing the number of missions, so increasing the frequency of sampling. It might require smaller teams. It will increase safety because you don't have to have people out there, and it can have a drastically lower carbon footprint. But the key question is, it's great if they can go there and collect data, but they need to be able to provide the environmental evidence that's needed in the places that are needed. We're using Northwest Hutton as an example. It's a relatively standard structure in the North Sea that has been decommissioned. It's about 150 meters depth. It's quite old. It's been decommissioned already, and we're left with footings on the seafloor. So this was our target site for a number of reasons. One is we had quite good data for the site, and the other is that we were able to visit it and collect additional data as part of the program. So we tried it. We went out to Shetland. We launched this autonomous vehicle, Auto Sublong Range, or Boaty McBoatface, according to the popular press. And we launched it from Shetland, and we carried out two missions, one to the north, to Northwest Hutton, and one to the south, to Braemar Popmarks and the Miller decommissioning site. These missions were both successful. It took about just over 20 days, covering over 1,000 kilometers, and used a very small amount of energy, about the equivalent energy of a couple of liters of diesel fuel, although this is a battery-powered vehicle. And during that mission, we were able to collect thousands of color images, millions of black and white pictures with laser lines, and as well as a whole range of additional data, ADCP, CTD, and some sensor data on the hydrocarbons. We didn't use, but we could have used an eDNA sensor. At the time of the deployment, we were not able to use that, but we could have now. So that would be a potential for future activities as well. And we wanted to hit some key environmental monitoring targets. We wanted to look at the role of the structures. Unfortunately, we couldn't actually directly go too close to the structures because of the way that the vehicle was controlled, but we were able to go to areas of cuttings piles quite close, within a few hundred meters of the structure. We were able to explore the water column above and around the structure and the seafloor in the vicinity. And we wanted to look at the range of parameters that are generally used to look at biological, physical, chemical impacts, and looking at other related issues as well, like debris and hazards. So we characterized the seafloor using the autonomous vehicle, as well as using some standard mapping from the Scotia the year before to provide some sort of comparison for the site. So the acoustic mapping from the ship is broad scale, and it can be platform independent. Actually, it doesn't really matter what platform you use for the mapping. Although fine scale mapping, particularly in deeper waters, is easier with AUVs. and you can carry out change detection as a result. The seabed imagery through an AUV is a good platform for seabed imagery, but as I said before, we can't get close to the structure. We can't do things like put sediment grain size through that imagery approach, which means that it's difficult to compare to some of the previous data that have been collected from the site. But you can see we were able to collect a centimetre resolution bathymetry data with the AUV, and we were able to collect some high-resolution photographs. You can see this octagonal structure on the seafloor. At the bottom, it's photographed, and the top is the microbathymetry, clearly showing the structure at very high resolution. We were also able to use the ADCP on the autonomous vehicle to collect profiles of water current speed and direction over the structure. And this is the backscatter from the ADCP, and you can see the structure quite clearly. We can also characterize the current speed around the structure as we go over it, and we can see there's evidence here of a sort of a downstream reduced current and a change in current direction as well associated with the structure. We collected a relatively small data set on this mission, but we could have collected a lot in quite a straightforward way. We were also able to use a suite of 3 chemical sensors on the vehicle to look at methane, PAH, and some other parameters whilst we were carrying out the mission. There was no particularly exciting information from Northwest Hutton. We weren't expecting there to be, but we did visit the Braemar pot marks, which are an area of active methane seepage, and we were able to detect a methane peak as we went over an active pot mark, suggesting that the technology could detect relatively large leakages, although it may not be appropriate for looking at the smallest things that could happen. We were also able to characterize the biological environment. Using a standard survey, you can see the sort of, at the top, the high resolution pictures of sea anemones and urchins on the seafloor, so we could characterize those, see how they changed in response to the disturbance. The AUV was able to collect a similar data set, not quite as high resolution, but over a much wider area. And you can see the fish very clearly in the imagery, and you can even see them in the bathymetry data. So sort of conclusion on that is that the AUV is possible to collect quite a lot of this kind of information, but not all of the stuff, particularly the information that's typically collected, for example, with the sediment macrofauna. The other thing of this AUV survey is we were able to detect quite a few other things as well. We could see a whole range of debris in the images, and we were able to georeference those precisely. We could see potential hazards for seabed operations and characterize the impacts. You can just about see on the picture to the right that the colours you're seeing are sort of the actual imagery mosaicked over that wide area. And you can see fairly clearly that there's a dark seabed area around Northwest Hutton, which we assume is related to the oil impacts. So it's quite interesting that even at that resolution, you can start to see some of the changes. So to try and summarise, can the autonomous survey meet the monitoring requirements? We felt that the pre-decommissioning assessment of cuttings piles can be done, or at least partially done. Going to structures is always going to be a challenge because of the dangers of operating a vehicle like this around the structure. And I think we'll have some excellent talks later about work with structures that we weren't able to do with an autonomous survey. Once the structure's removed, it's a bit easier. We can carry out debris surveys. We can characterise the environment in some ways, but not as many as we would perhaps like. And if a structure is remaining in place, we can potentially monitor some infrastructure like pipelines that are relatively low relief, and we can carry out ongoing environmental monitoring. So I think the conclusions are that we can do effective remote sensing, and we have done at Northwest Hutton for a range of parameters listed there. And we were able to do that with much lower cost energy and emissions than we would have been able to do in the ship. But we can't do some of the really common survey operations that are typical for the North Sea, looking at the sediments themselves, and particularly the informal biology. We can't get close to the infrastructure, but we can get to the edge of the cuttings paths, and we need to characterise exactly whether we can see the same patterns in the remote sense data as we can in the sort of standard data that we're collecting. But it does have many opportunities as well beyond decommissioning monitoring. There's looking at marine protected area monitoring, blue carbon assessment. And so ultimately we feel the AUV offers a complementary approach where you can combine a autonomous survey with a shipboard survey, targeting the shipboard survey to a much smaller scope and get a lot more information that's informed by the autonomous operations. So with that, I'll finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Really interesting to hear about the scope of this technology, but also that it seems to sip fuel, although it's battery operated. Like it seems to operate very, very low energy conditions. So thank you. Like I should have said at the start of the session, we'll come back for some questions at the very end of all the talks. So I'm moving us on now to our next speaker. If I welcome up John Halpin from the NS 3D project. John.
Okay, I'm going to be talking about analysis of imagery data and lessons learned from the InSight North Sea 3D project. I work on this project at SAMS with Joe Marlowe and Tom Wilding. Okay, so I'm going to give an outline of the North Sea 3D project, talk you through our workflow, and then some of kind of the challenges we found with working with industry ROV footage and how we've overcome those challenges and some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. So the North Sea 3D project, its aim is to significantly improve marine growth biomass estimates for North Sea man-made structures. And the methods are combining photogrammetry, so that's effectively 3D models from photographs, and machine learning or AI. And our data source is industry ROV inspection footage. Our deliverables, so generate benthic biomass estimates for offshore structures using novel 3D imaging techniques, analysing existing industry data. Objective 2 is to train AI algorithms for auto-ID of epifaunal species within footage and combine this with 3D imaging techniques to enable rapid generation of high-resolution faunal models for industry.
John.
Yep. Sorry, thanks. And finally, Objective 3 is to use the outputs from our first two objectives to quantify using a linear model the relationship between biomass and the identity of marine growth with structure type, location, and depth and age. And of course, this requires a large quantity of industry footage over structure type, location, depth, and age. Okay, so that's the key point. We need industry footage to do this. So at the start of the project, we put out a call for industry footage, and thank you. Lots was forthcoming. Many external hard drives were exchanged. It was fun to find out that industry enjoyed working with OneDrive and SharePoint as much as we did. We managed. We've got lots of footage now. Terabytes have been provided. So this is our workflow. So we get the industry footage. So top left, industry footage. We make a 3D model with that. Then we run it through our AI species recognition. So in this case, we've got a section that's covered in Metridium. The AI has found all of the Metridium. We subtract the underlying structure, and that gives us a biovolume. And from that biovolume, we use species-specific conversion factors to go to a biomass. Brilliant. Does it work? Well, yes. Obviously, we can't go to a structure and start kind of surveying it and scraping things off as much as we'd like to. But we used a local reef as a proxy for this. So we surveyed a local reef and then extracted regions in quadrats. We used traditional methods to measure your biomass and compared them with our photogrammetry and machine learning methods. And they compare quite nicely. For most species, it works well. For Metridium, not so much. But the catch is with Metridium, it's able to change its volume by kind of a factor of 1,000 and thus its density. So you would expect this to perhaps not be not have the same accuracy as the other species. Great. So yeah, we've got this workflow, this pipeline that we know works really, really well. Okay, so just to the first step, making that 3D model. So we use photogrammetry, which is a vision or image-based technique. Okay, so vision, that's going to be limited by visibility, lighting, and resolution in those images. And those are sometimes limited, unfortunately, in this industry footage, which is kind of that's a challenge for us. Okay, so sorry for being so enthusiastic, but this is a really nice bit of industry footage. The lighting is great. It's taken from quite a good distance away, not too close, not too far away. It's not blurred. I think there's a really good quality camera used here. It's actually a GoPro, but GoPros are good. So fantastic. Wouldn't it be great if it was all like this? Okay, so let's sort of perhaps be a bit more realistic. So the lighting probably isn't set up quite right. So we might have kind of this. The illumination might be off, and because the illumination perhaps isn't what it should be, the camera isn't so good, and it's struggling to keep up. You know, it's kind of on the noise floor, so we've got this noise introduced into the image. The camera, because it's struggling with the lighting, has increased the time it takes to take each image. So now we've got this motion blur. Okay, so we'll deal with that. The camera's quite old, so the resolution isn't good. Industry loves to put these overlays on. So we've lost all this information. The bigger the better. You know, that's, I guess it's very expensive to do, so you really want to put your name on it. That's it, right? It's not going to get any worse. It does. Okay, so the ROV is often there for a purpose. It'll have some tooling. So for many reasons, there's challenges with working with this footage. Lots of the information that could be in the image is lost. So poor lighting, camera quality, wrong settings, the optics perhaps aren't up to it. Tooling, informational overlays, and so on. Even analog camera systems. We've had some stuff that's definitely come off a VHS tape. So another issue is the survey path. So this would be our ideal survey path. So lots of kind of overlapping transects all around the structure. That kind of helps calibrate our models and produces this nice kind of 360-degree sort of model of the structure. And perhaps some kind of exposed areas on the structure as well that helps us kind of fit the CAD model to the 3D model. But in reality, this happens. So in practice, the ROV is probably there for a reason. It's not looking at the marine growth. It's probably found an anode, and it's going to dwell on that. This single point of view is not ideal for photogrammetry. So the footage is obviously taken from another purpose other than marine growth surveys, and this can obviously introduce a possible bias into the marine growth survey. Another challenge is scaling. So we want to scale these models so that we can actually have, we're using a volume. That has to be scaled. This footage that's taken often isn't scaled inherently. Ideally, we'd have laser pointers there or a stereo camera system, but in practice, we often don't have that. Or in this case, we do have laser pointers, but you can't really see them that well. The arrow's pointing them out, but they're kind of lost in the metridium. So lots of challenges, but we found that, well, there is some excellent footage out there, and from that excellent footage, with thoughtful processing and selection, we can extract the biomass, which is great. So that's a very, kind of a best case model. But yeah, we're very able to do that. So we found some tricks help. So we've been using AI to enhance the colour and sort of restore some of the detail. That's a mixed bag, but it can be very useful. We found a very good trick is to fit the underlying geometry from CAD and engineering drawings. That means we don't need scaling the images. The scaling comes afterwards when we fit the model to the 3D model. For some footage, well, we just can't do photogrammetry, but our machine learning still works really well. So, we can use that to kind of, we can have conversion factors and go from this to a volume. So that, that's something we can do with footage that perhaps isn't suitable for photogrammetry. The metadata, which is kind of a nuisance, is actually, well, it's metadata, great. So we've found that we can use AI to extract all this metadata, and obviously that tells us where we're surveying and lots of other useful information too, so perhaps the depth, and often this isn't stuff we're given aside from this overlay, so if we can extract it automatically, that's fantastic. We're now working with industry, so amongst others, SSE are on board with us. They're doing a time series, which is amazing because it gives us multiple models that we can overlay and look at how the growth has changed with time. They're using a stereo camera system, which means we can scale our models. We're advising industry, and this obviously has benefits to us and the project and its outcomes and outputs. But it also, many benefits to industry, so it future-proofs their footage, and makes it also more suitable for asset inspection. So the job that they're trying to do in the first place, which is asset inspection, our help helps them with that too, just by improving the footage quality. So we've made an SOP for industry. Please talk to us if you'd like that. It's incredibly easy to follow. We've made it simple, and it's never been easier or cheaper to get good footage. Operators can acquire excellent footage with very little extra effort. I guess referring to some of the slides from the previous speakers, there's going to be so many structures, well, there's so many structures in the sea at the moment, and so many more are going to be installed. We need a tool to rapidly assess what's on these structures, and we have made this tool. We now have an automated workflow to do this. So in summary, industry footage can be excellent for 3D AI-assisted marine growth estimates, but it can be compromised. With minor changes to data collection, it could all be excellent. Bespoke data collection results in superior models, and our analysis pipeline has automated marine growth assessment for biomass, by volume, and identity. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for an excellent talk. Amazing what you've done with that footage. And I think we're going to move on to Joe now, who's going to drill into some more applications of that footage and where it can go. So over to you, Joe. There's your clicker.
Right. Hi, I'm Joe. I'm a postdoc at SAMS working on the North Sea 3D project with John and Tom. I'm a benthic ecologist, but I'm going to talk about something a little bit different, which is a kind of offshoot from the North Sea 3D project, which is all about creating virtual reality environments to promote the understanding of structures in the marine environment. So everyone in this room knows that when you put a structure in the sea, that's not the end of the story. I spend my days staring at footage like this, which can be really quite beautiful. These structures attract life, whether it is what we call marine growth, so the epibiota living on the structure, which can have incredibly high biomass, high diversity, and certainly adds to the surrounding environment, which is otherwise a soft sediment environment. And indeed, fish and marine predators are all attracted to these environments, and there's elements of invasive species, or something like Lophelia here, huge amounts of endangered species growing on these structures. And so all of us are kind of basically discussing, all right, well, what does this mean for the wider environment? What does it mean for the future of somewhere like the North Sea in terms of all of the structures we're putting in and those structures that might well be coming out at some point or are destined to come out. And so we're kind of reaching a consensus that there are both positive and negative aspects of these structures. And they have to be kind of treated in that way. But what about the public? I don't know about you, but if I talk to anybody about man-made structures in the sea who isn't in this world, then they don't really think about it from one day to the next. And I guess that's because they're out of sight, out of mind. And that's partly why we're putting so much wind structures out in the sea, is because basically it's a lot easier for planning. There's also a lot more wind out there. But if we're going to change how we go about decommissioning, I think we need to bring the public with us. And so they need to be much more aware of the environment that comes with these structures. So in North Sea 3D, we are inherently producing a lot of we deal with a lot of very interesting multimedia that comes from industry ROV footage, but we also produce our own. So we kind of thought we were in a really good position to share this with the public. So this is one of our 3D models, and then it's got the AI overlay, which is all of John's amazing work. So I think it was a couple of years ago now, there was a call for some Insight extended funding for the phase 2 projects, and we applied based on a number of projects, and one of that was basically outreach. We wanted to go out there and explain to the public the kind of the life that is associated with offshore structures, and start to have a dialogue with, what should be going on with these in the future, whether the ones that are there should be the OSPAR 98.3, what do people think about it, not really to have an agenda, but to begin a discussion. So one of the first things we did was we went to Dynamic Earth here in Edinburgh for a marine careers showcase for school children. There was about 600 school kids over about 5 hours. It was manic. I would not recommend it. I think John's face kind of here really gives away, yeah. But we had various aspects. We brought our ROV, we brought a massive lump of Lophelia, we had videos showing ROV footage, but the thing that really, really engaged with the kids was the VR. And the VR at that point was basically just, I think it was actually the model that formed our publication. So it was a dive I did on a reef off Oban, and they loved it. And I think it was more than just beyond, it's technology. They were also interacting with the content of the VR. So this got us thinking, okay, what can we do? And around that time, we were contacted by Rachel Pearl, who, if any of you were here last year, she brought this structure along, which was one of her projects, which is all about using 3D printing to kind of generate, I guess, a nature-inclusive retrospective design on old oil and gas structures. And she was really interested to collaborate with us, and we were interested to collaborate with her. And she works on a master's course at the University of Arts London, at the Central St Martin's campus. That's a narrative environment. It's all about researchers designs and develop stories about science, technology, and society that test the boundaries of space and time. It's not what we normally work with, so, but it was interesting, very, very interesting. And we got discussing. And so at Central St Martin's, they have a huge digital element. And so we went about discussing how we could actually develop the VR. And so in the end, we collaborated on a project where 7 of their students worked on it over 6 weeks, where we wanted to basically, our vision was to produce a huge VR model from all of our 3D models of an offshore structure so people could explore it and to really get a sense of the scale of something like this and the amount of life associated with it. There were some lessons learned along the way. I think we kind of naively thought we could give them a load of the models that we have created and they could directly apply that to their VR world and make a structure which was completely composed of real models of marine growth. That was very much not the case. And I think lessons went the other way as well, that these people had, they don't have a marine ecology background. So the initial models had all kinds of interesting species going around them. So we had little dories going around the North Sea. The visibility was incredible. And bubbles coming out of the seabed at all spaces. But it was a really interesting process for all of us involved. And actually, so what we got down to was, in the end, a structure that was made, the marine growth is very much artificial, but it's a working process. So here are some images of the VR environment. We've very much got kind of, it's jumping a bit, a zonation from a kind of macroalgal-dominated shallow area. These are their renditions of anemones, which it works very well, and some Alcyonium soft corals. It is jumping a bit, but ignore the lines. That's the path of the seal, which I couldn't quite get out of the video. The video is a bit skippy. Doesn't really matter, because actually if you want to give it a go, we are right outside and we do have the VR environment, so you can give it a go. But we were really impressed. This was 6 weeks work from 7 students, not full time. And I think it was giving us a really clear indication of if we would progress this technology, where we could go with it. So where we have been taking it is science festivals. So far we went to the Edinburgh Science Festival last month. We had 1,000 visitors in one day. Yeah, I say we, I wasn't there. John was. I was in the Red Sea with Sam's students, so I had a great time. But I am going to Glasgow. But it was really good, actually, because from what I hear, we have obviously the VR, which is very, very interactive with the kids. They're very drawn to that, but their parents are there as well. And so whilst the kids are kind of interacting with the VR and someone's obviously talking to them about the marine life, we're able to interact with the parents. So it's, we're able to kind of educate across all levels. And we will also be going to Glasgow Science Festival, where I will be. And that's in Botanics from the 7th to 8th of June. So if you're interested, please do come along. I'm hoping that's me wrapping up, yeah. We will be outside. Please do come along and talk to us. Very interested in hearing what anybody has to say about how else we can use this technology, because at the moment we're obviously using it for outreach, and we can see how it could be used for maybe training ROV pilots in the appropriate kind of courses for photogrammetry surveys, but we think it's got a lot of uses. Oh yeah, I meant to remember that, yeah. Sorry, there is also audio, which we thought was quite important, and the audio is tapped into the VR headset, and that is basically it's recordings taken from actual functioning platforms. So there's cods, there's seals, there's porpoises, and I think there's the hum of the structure itself. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Fascinating talk, Joe. Thank you very much. I can think of a few applications, and I think widening that out to even government audiences and like other professional communities could be quite useful too. So, but we're moving on to our last speaker, Josh Lawrence, we're shifting focus now from NS3D to the fish spams project, and Josh was going to fill us in on some of the technological challenges and how they overcame them. There you go.
Thanks, Hank. Okay. Yeah, my name's Josh Lawrence, working at Heriot Watt in the Lyell Centre, and I'm harking back to some of the topics that Dan covered in the first talk of this session, but about some work that Paul and I have been doing, and some of the challenges we've been dealing with trying to sample around offshore structures, and some of the innovations and the marine autonomous and non-autonomous systems that we've been using. So to give some context to the technology, we're actually sort of bridging InSight and EcoWind with this work. So in the fish spams project, which is fish spillover production and aggregation at man-made structures, that's a project that ends this year, as we know, in the InSight program, and we're looking at fish distributions around oil and gas infrastructure in the context of decommissioning, as we're all aware. And the main question that we're hoping to answer or to look at evidence for is whether there's aggregation of fish at these structures and whether there's evidence for elevated production. The next sort of stage of the technology work is on the EcoWings project in the EcoWind program, which is ecosystem change, offshore wind, net gain, and seabirds. And that runs until 2026. Where we'll be looking at fish distributions in and around offshore wind farms. And then, as well as fish data, we're looking to compare to seabird distributions, looking at spatial overlap and that sort of predator-prey spatial dynamics. However, as has been mentioned, there are challenges for traditional research vessels working around these structures. So there's issues of access that Dan touched on, both in terms of legality. So oil and gas platforms in the North Sea have 500-meter safety zones, which are essentially closed areas to all but sort of their own vessel traffic. And that's because of the risk to that sensitive infrastructure. And then around offshore wind farms, it's a bit, can be case dependent, but particularly during construction, there are issues around sort of safety and getting in the way of activities. There's also issues for the safety of crew. So in the EU, there's about 2,500 accidents or injuries reported at sea every year. There's also issues, anyone who's tried to do or arrange marine surveys, vessel availability and cost is a big factor to consider. So I'm using the Scottish Government research boats, the Scotia and Alba Namara, as sort of examples, but their costs total about £5 million a year to get a combined 500 days of sea time. And as Dan mentioned, the carbon footprint, Scotia and Alba combine to use about 1,800 tonnes of diesel every year that I have the data for online. So yeah, a large carbon footprint. However, we think that autonomous or uncrewed vehicles offer some solutions. So to counter the traditional problem of site access and risks, essentially the small size of some of these autonomous and uncrewed vehicles means there's essentially zero risk to any infrastructure. You make it safe for crew by having no crew on board. Vessel availability and some of the flexibility that these offer, as the field grows, there are more of these vessels available, and some of the advantages that I'll touch on later are that they're very flexible in how they can be mobilized. So you can launch them near your survey sites. The high costs of traditional vessels are countered by much lower operational costs of these autonomous and uncrewed vessels, and the carbon footprint is much, much lower. So that stat that Scotia and Alba use 18,000 tonnes of diesel per year, our USV, if we were to survey continuously for a year, which would actually give you about the same number of amount of survey time, would use less than 3 tonnes of diesel. So it's significant savings. Our experience of USV surveys to date, we did one survey in 2021 where we were working with a company called X-Ocean. You can see in the video that it's launched from a trailer, so that, as I mentioned, the mobilization is completely flexible. Because of the small size of the vehicle, we're able to get up close with it and calibrate our equipment, which is really important for getting accurate measurements. The boat surveys at about 3.5 knots, which isn't as fast as a larger ship, but is perfectly usable. And during this survey, we surveyed 4 oil platforms and an offshore wind farm over the course of a 5-day survey. Just to give a sense of what that survey process or the experience is like, these are some screenshots from the remote pilot sort of camera system. And you can see there's 4 aft, port and starboard, and this is us right up close to an oil rig. And we were able to get to within about 20 meters of the rigs without any risk to the rig itself. Here's a screenshot showing through a wind farm. You can see the turbines sort of all across the horizon. We didn't go right up close to the turbines, but we did put a line through the middle of a wind farm. And you can see over on the left, you've got sort of pilot information with vessel details and data, and then the sort of chart plotter view on the right. However, we did have some problems with that process and those surveys. The vehicle had limitations on the range from shore. It had limited endurance. We had some issues with data quality, and because we were essentially a customer of X-Ocean, who are a commercial enterprise, there was a lack of control that we had about some aspects of the logistics. We had a longer survey planned for 2022, but some of the problems got worse, and a change to the electrical system actually meant that the data was unusable, so we had to cancel that survey. We've since taken matters into our own hands and are now working with the National Robotarium, developing Sea Enduro, which is our own USV that we own at Heriot-Watt University. And this is very similar to the X-Ocean platform, so it's small, again, launched by a trailer, about 500 kilos and 4 by 2.5 meters, so another really small platform. It does have some modifications needed, though, to be survey ready, and as well as that, we have some plans for some extra vehicles. We have an AUV as well. This is quite a lot smaller than Dan's Boaty McBoatface. It's about 3 meters long, and because it's modular, it's very flexible. Weighs about 40 kilos, so we just launch it by hand off a small boat. And this is it at the surface, so it has a little orange antenna, and that's how it checks in with its, to confirm its location and check in with mission control, and then it's capable of operating at about 100 meters and has an upwards-facing echo sounder. So that means that it fits in nicely with a planned multi-platform survey we're going to be doing in some wind farms. As I mentioned, eco wings is fish and seabirds being considered. So we've got aerial surveys from a plane looking at seabird distributions. We'll then have the USV, the uncrewed surface vessel, surveying fish in the water column and down near the seabed. And then simultaneously, we'll have the AUV surveying fish at about 30 meters, looking up towards the surface to see fish that the USV can't see. And this gives us a full surface to seabed data collection. The area this is planned is in the sort of area just offshore from Edinburgh and around the Isle of May. These green polygons are some of the wind farms there. Overlaid there are the plane transects, so the seabird surveys. We're going to fit our USV transects across that, hopefully passing through at least 2 wind farms which are there and some planned wind farms. And then the AUV, it does have a shorter endurance, but that will do some similar transects or the same transects as the USV, so we get that full water column survey. With this in mind, the USV does have certain requirements. So the plan is for it to work fully over the horizon, but without a mothership, but then in a non-autonomous mode. So as I said, it's piloted in real time over a satellite link. It needs to operate around structures. We'll need more than 4 days of endurance. It needs to be safe for other marine users and for infrastructure. And as part of that, we need the MCA, the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, to be on board, or not on board. The modifications that we need for our USV, there's a few problems that we had, and therefore the solution. So originally it was only battery powered, so we're fitting or have fitted an onboard generator. For connectivity over the horizon, we've added Starlink. Obviously, a vessel of any size does pose some navigational risk, so we've had to upgrade some of the lights, radio, and cameras. We have some issues with the vessel control software, where it was essentially an over-the-counter USV and software, so we're considering a refit, but that's going to be an extension or an additional bit of work. And there are still some hoops we have to jump through to operate around these structures. So there's bureaucracy and risk assessments that need doing. Oh, 1 minute. As I mentioned, we need the MCA to sign off on the vessel. And part of that is that essentially there's no grey logistical area or legislative area for research activities. We basically count as a full commercial vessel. And there's this legislation, the Workbook Code 3, that has huge numbers of requirements for safety, safety equipment and control software. So it's arduous but necessary, because the most important thing is that it's safe. The modifications are complex because the main benefit of these systems is that they are small, but that does bring challenges with the small form factor, and there are costs up front in terms of time and money. And additionally, we are still having some difficulties getting access to sites. So despite EcoWind putting out some guidelines for getting access to the wind farm sites, there have been some developers who've been hesitant, particularly around construction, even though technically they should allow third-party access. And there's also some hesitations that we've heard around the fact that it's novel technology, but we're hoping that risk assessment processes and demonstrating a track record will get over those concerns. However, we are optimistic for the future. As I said, our vessels are very nearly ready for surveying. This is footage of the USV trials on Loch Earn. We've already got some data that Paul will be talking about later, and we're really excited to start getting some of these new data sets. We've already got plans for more developments and future applications, so we're planning to add a hydrophone so we can listen for marine mammals, an ADCP to look at hydrodynamics, possibly a drop camera to look at species, ID and sizing, and maybe bottom substrates. And also we're planning to grow the fleet. So we've already got a second USV, which when we finish developing the first one, we'll get started on. But just to emphasize that the real 3 main benefits of this sort of equipment are the low costs, operational costs at least, low carbon footprint, and low risk to infrastructure and other marine users. And that is everything. So I didn't have to get the stop sign.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you to all our speakers. All all who kept to time as well. So that's left some time for questions now at the end. We open up for questions from the floor. We've got some questions online too, but I think it'd be good to kick off with, if anyone has questions about some of the technology that we saw there. We covered a lot of sort of challenges, but also working around the challenges. I think it's really interesting how all three projects we've just heard about have explored different technologies that are available, but also driven them forward to achieve new things. And then there are lots of new possibilities as well. Now that's just a flavor of some of what the Insight program have been working on, but it's a good start. So we've got about 10 minutes now, and take any questions from the floor. If not, we can go online. That's fine. Yes, gentleman over there in the blue jacket.
Hi, my name is Connor Gilmore. I'm from Harriet Watt. Just a question for Joshua. What sort of weather can your vessel operate in?
Is this? Oh, sorry. So it's a little bit unclear, and the main limitation will be the data quality. So the vessel is actually designed to be self-writing. So essentially, any weather, it should survive. But the limitations on where we'll keep getting good data, because essentially the sensor is on a keel underneath, and it's a sonar. So if there's bad weather and you get lots of bubbles in train, then that'll introduce a lot of noise into the data. So because it's still in development, we haven't done full testing, but we're expecting, because it's on this retractable keel, that in up to sort of sea states 5 or 6, we should still be able to get data, and it should survive way beyond that, is our hope anyway.
Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Question here in the front, please. And if you could announce your name and organisation, please.
Hi, Chris Landham from CFAS here, working on the EcoStar project. So question for John. I'm really interested in the biomass estimates you're getting, from the structures. Seems like early days still, technology is working, but are you getting estimates that you're perhaps comfortable with now for different types of structures that you could, start to share?
Yes, we are. I guess we're limited by the footage and the number of structures that we're able to do it for, but yes, we are.
Have you had any chance to analyse the data you're getting back? Do you see differences in different types of structures, or?
Early days for that, yeah. I guess there are very obvious differences, but I think that the more sort of nuanced ones will come out in the numbers at the end when we kind of put everything together.
Okay, brilliant. We'll have to chat further. Thanks.
So it's worth opening up on that. I think one of the challenges is getting footage, right? I mean, if you've got more footage, you can widen the scope of that. It might be something to look into, Chris, as well with John. More questions from the floor? Right at the top there's a lady there.
Thank you. I'm Pamela Ernstberger from the Olimor project. It's a European Horizon Europe funded project. And I just wondered if you are still accepting data, probably from wind farms, that our project is focused on demonstrating the benefits of marine multi-use with wind farms along low trophic aquaculture. So our project's just 1 year, about a year and a half into the after the deployment and into the project. So I just wondered, are you still accepting data for wind farms?
Are you talking about ROV data?
Yes, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, okay,
It's despite having lots, it's been a struggle. So yes.
Okay, and another question: what has been the limitations with the wind farms at your end? I don't know.
In many ways, actually, so I've been kind of leading the trying to get data element. We've actually found that wind farms have been a bit more forthcoming with the ROV data, but they might they don't seem to do ROV inspections as often as oil and gas do. So whilst they may be forthcoming, the data isn't there as much. But yeah, there hasn't been any. It's often that the ROV data or the wind farms are owned by a consortium of companies, so they have to get a consensus amongst those companies. And then the ROV data might not even be owned by them. It could be owned by the survey company, or it's in their possession, or it's in a desk and no one has any idea where it is. And then we have to go through legal and NDAs and so on. So it's been a very long, drawn-out process. And often you think you're getting close and then it just goes. So, yeah.
That's right. We appreciate that.
Yeah. But any data, yeah, very welcome, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll take a question from online now, and David Santillo from Greenpeace for Dan. Everything working online, Dan? Yeah? Great. David's remarking on the technology, the amazing technology and the results, and despite the limitation of getting close to the structure itself. When you mention eDNA, presumably you would be water sampling as well, and I think he'd like to ask you a question around what sort of water sampling capabilities do you envisage as well in the future?
So yes, you're right. We did not do the eDNA work, but yes, it would. We have an autonomous eDNA sampler at NOC. I think it's commercially available, but it takes water samples as the AEV goes through its mission and stores them in filter units that are in a cartridge, a bit like a Gatling gun, as it goes through the water column. So yes, you could use that to obtain somewhat spatially resolved eDNA samples throughout the quite a long endurance mission using the autonomous system that we've got with Water7 Long Range.
That's great, Dan. We look forward to seeing how that pans out in future. Another question from the floor, please.
Thanks. It's Paul Fernandez from Heriot-Watt University. It's a question for John and his team. You mentioned a lot about the sessile organisms that you're estimating, and you also said that sometimes the robotic arm gets in the way. I guess fish get in the way as well. What do you do with those?
Yeah, so it's quite, fortunately, the photometric workflow, often if you have a section that's moving like that, there's ways that you can kind of exclude it from the final model. So we don't actually have to worry too much about them. We just kind of run it through the pipeline and the fish is gone at the end of it. We don't end up with like a fish floating in the air, which would be cool in its own way, I guess. But yeah, fish aren't too much of a problem.
Maybe we could get that data from you, though.
Yeah, there's lots of fish. Yeah, big ling and so on. Yeah.
Always opportunities there for cross-project collaboration. Yeah.
Something we are working on is 4D photogrammetry, which would be able to resolve a fish in 3D, which I'm quite excited about. So perhaps we could work on that with you.
Interesting. Yeah. We've got quite a lot of questions online. I think for a lot of those, we'll have to get back to people after the session there. We just take one more question. Just a lady here.
Yes, thank you everyone for your talks. My name is Laura LeBur. I'm formerly with the Smithsonian Marine Station, but my background is in science communication and community engagement. So my question is for Joe and the team. And I sort of wonder, how far are you guys willing to take the community engagement aspect? Because you talked about wanting to develop it further. But like, are you planning on more development, lesson plans, bringing that to schools? Is that part of the discussion or maybe not?
I think we've yet to have that. We've got our immediate goals of going to these science festivals, and we do have, within SAMS, we have our own kind of STEM outreach. So I think we'll be trying to incorporate the VR with what they do, certainly. Personally, I found the whole experience really quite exciting, so I'd quite like to see where it goes in terms of developing the VR. So yeah, I guess watch this space, but nothing concrete as yet, yeah.
Thank you. I think I'm going to draw that to a close now. We're coming into our break time now. So if we could thank all of our speakers again. and thanks to all of you for the questions. And like I said, with the online questions, we'll get back to you later with those. For now, though, we've got a half-hour break session, so you can make your way through the back of the auditorium for tea and coffee. Please be sure to have a look at the posters. Our next session is due back at half 11, and it's going to be on contaminants, biochemistry, carbon cycling, and microbial interactions. So we'll see you here for half 11. Oh, and for speakers of session 2, if you could come here 10 minutes early, please. We'll meet you before the session. Thank you.